Hey everyone, today I'm making my first video on what else but the greatest manga of all time, Berserk by Kentaro Miura. There are obviously hundreds of hours of analysis that you could do on any aspect of this manga, but since this is my first video on it, I figured I might as well start right at the beginning, the Black Swordsman Arc. Ever since I finished Berserk, I've been kind of irked by fans who just constantly downplay this introductory arc and its importance to the manga. Yeah, I do think it's the worst arc in Berserk, but that sounds a lot worse on the surface than it actually is. If you're a big fan of rap music, then maybe you could think about it like this. Take Kendrick Lamar's 3 most recent studio albums. I'd say that Damn is probably the worst out of all of them. Does that mean that it's bad? No, it's a great album, and what's more is that it's absolutely essential to listen to if you want to understand the full extent of Kendrick's music and his evolution as an artist over the years. And that's kind of how I feel about the Black Swordsman arc. Yeah, it's the worst in Berserk, but Berserk is the greatest manga ever in my opinion, so that just means it falls short of the closest thing to perfection. What I worry about is that people may not understand how essential the Black Swordsman arc is to the story of Guts and to the world of Berserk. And what worries me even more is when new readers ask if they should just skip the arc entirely and start with the Golden Age. Yes, I think the Golden Age is definitely a much better and more polished part of the story, but everyone is sleeping on the first 8 chapters that come before that. The Black Swordsman arc is absolutely necessary to the story of Berserk, and it sets up so many important elements of the manga, while adding to and foreshadowing parts of the already incredible story told within the Golden Age arc. No one should be skipping over this arc or viewing it as dispensable, and this video will tell you exactly why that is the case. Before we get into all of that though, just a quick reminder that if you love Berserk or anime and manga in general, then consider liking the video and subscribing to this channel. I'm releasing a new video every week, so I'd appreciate any support and feedback. If I haven't convinced you yet, then feel free to stick around and let the rest of the video convince you. Spoilers, by the way. Now, if we're doing an analysis of the Black Swordsman arc, then who better to start with than the Black Swordsman himself, Guts. I wanted to call him by his full name there, and then I just realized that he doesn't have one. So I'll be totally honest here. Guts in this arc is a bit of a two-sided coin because I believe he is one of the reasons that this arc is so important to the story, but his characterization in the early chapters of Berserk is actually something that can turn a lot of people off of the manga. I'm not just going to pretend that this manga is completely flawless or anything, so let's just address these criticisms head on. The first big problem is that the literal first panel doesn't sit right with anyone after they've read the rest of the manga. So Guts is obviously deeply in love with Casca, and he cares about her more than he cares about anyone else. I mean, at least in a romantic way. He really cares about Griffith too, but that's more in like a murderous way. So having sex with this apostle seems really out of character, even if it's meant to be some sort of strategic way of fighting them. Now, you could explain this away as a manifestation of Guts' desperation and depleting sanity after his 2 years of hunting apostles, which is something I'll touch on later. But I think it's way more likely that Miura just had not conceived of Casca's existence yet. I've read some interviews where he kind of touches on the fact that he didn't have every aspect of the Golden Age laid out while he started writing the Black Swordsman arc, so in my eyes, this is the most logical explanation. And while this first example is definitely a glaring inconsistency in Guts' character, I honestly don't think he acts out of character during the rest of this arc. Yeah, he's an asshole for most of it. He's condescending and abrasive towards Puck and Vargas. He uses Teresia as bait during his fight with the Count, and he takes pleasure in torturing his enemies after defeating them. Although I don't really have much sympathy for the apostles he fights, but like, you know, maybe don't do it in front of his daughter. I think the problem that some people have with this is that they want to like Guts since he's the protagonist. But in my eyes, the point is that you're not supposed to like him here. Think about it. Guts has been fighting demons and apostles for 2 years straight by himself. He's probably barely slept for most of those 2 years, and has been constantly injured and fatigued, and his rage and lust for revenge against Griffith has grown infinitely stronger over those years. Virtually anybody would be an abrasive asshole if they were in these situations, and no one was around to ground him or support him at all. And that's the point of everything here. We see in the Golden Age arc exactly why Guts fell to this lowest point in his entire life. And then in the subsequent arcs, we see him finally open up and learn to trust and care for others once again. If Guts was the perfect, always likable protagonist, then Berserk would not resonate with nearly as many people as it does. This is Guts the struggler, Guts the Black Swordsman, and as the story progresses, Guts progresses with it. And maybe by the time of Fantasia, Guts would look back on his old self as if he was looking back at a complete stranger. That is the true beauty of Guts' portrayal in these first chapters, and why he needed to be this way for the story and his character to both be as great as they are. Now, I don't want to be misunderstood here. I'm not saying that Guts' character is just that of some super edgy dude during this arc, and that he only gains depth from here on out. I actually think that there's plenty of character depth presented within this arc, but it's done in very subtle ways. Here, Miura kinda treats Guts similarly to how he treats Griffith in the Golden Age. He generally veers away from letting the readers actually see Guts' inner monologue, and he mostly lets us interpret his true feelings ourselves. This technique makes Guts' true motivations and emotions fairly mysterious to us at times, and this pays off immensely with the Golden Age arc, as we finally get to see everything that led Guts to become who he is in the present. And even though we're not explicitly told all of Guts' feelings, there's still quite a lot we can infer through this arc. We know that there's more depth to Guts than just a desire for revenge. He can't stop retching after he's cut down Colette's possessed body. He seems to be losing his mind during Vargas' execution, despite putting up a really cold front when talking to Puck. And once again, he betrays his true emotions by crying after the confrontation with Griffith and the rest of the God Hand. By the way, this has to be one of the most unintentionally funny panels ever. And while we can see Guts' true emotions pouring through in these moments, many others are simply just much more ambiguous. A perfect example is in the very first chapter. Does Guts attack the Coca Castle thugs and attract the Snake Lord's attention because he doesn't care at all about the lives of the townspeople? Or does he do it both for revenge and to rescue the people who will eventually be sent to the castle as tributes? I mean, I'm assuming it's more so for revenge because, like, it seems like a bunch of people in the town died, but he does seem to pay special attention to the tributes who pass by him and even mentions them to the mayor later on. But I don't know, does he truly value those lives over the possibility of killing an apostle? I don't think so, but he values them to a degree, it seems. What's amazing about this arc is that we don't really know a lot about him. We're forced to continue reading to discover who Guts truly is. There are definitely other examples of this sort of ambiguity. I think Vargas especially is someone that Guts is really conflicted about, but I'll touch on him more when I talk about the Count later. Suffice to say, Guts is an incredibly compelling protagonist, but he would never have truly reached the heights that he does during this narrative if he didn't start in a place that he could grow from. I think the lack of knowledge that readers have about this character at the beginning of the story is honestly genius, and there are so many different interpretations of his actions during this part of the story because Miura doesn't explicitly tell us what Guts is thinking most of the time. This arc sets up Guts to become the incredible protagonist that he later becomes, and reading it is absolutely essential in understanding the totality of his character development. Now, the next character that I want to talk about is Puck, the other protagonist of this arc. Well, the Apostles and the God Hand represent the evil in Berserk's world, and characters like Guts and Vargas show the direct results of those evildoers' actions. Puck is one of the few characters who is still pure to some degree, and he represents the good that can exist despite all of these terrible circumstances. While later arcs often see Puck relegated to a purely comedic role as a member of Guts' party, in both the Black Swordsman Arc and Lost Children chapter in particular, Puck plays a much more central and essential part in the narrative. I mean, first of all, the story just doesn't move ahead without the presence of Puck. Guts would be fucking dead without this guy. However, Puck's character is much more important to the narrative than that. Now, this might sound a bit strange at first since he's an elf, but Puck is honestly one of the most human characters we encounter during this part of the story. And he's the one who's always trying to humanize Guts and steer him away from the destructive path that he's on. Puck shows us a very different perspective from that of Guts, and that's why he's always able to connect with and befriend people like Vargas and Teresia. Puck is the light that contrasts the darkness shrouded around Guts. And throughout this arc, he constantly demonstrates that there truly is hope within the world of Berserk. He doesn't show this to Guts alone, he does so to many people around him. First, we see him connecting with Vargas, a man who likely gave up all hope and only thought of getting revenge on the Count after his family was literally killed in front of him. While Guts provides Vargas with the hope of the Count being killed, Puck tries to convince Vargas that continuing to live on is much more important than his obsession with revenge. As I was rereading this part, the one line, "I think people need to keep on living," it really stuck out to me, and shows that Puck supports Guts' struggle against destiny despite not knowing that much about it yet. Puck is not nearly as strong as Guts physically, but in spite of that, he can still make an impact on others and try to make the world a better place. Unfortunately, Puck's physical weakness is another major factor in this arc. While we see that there is some goodness left in the world of Berserk, we also see that most of the people with goodness in their hearts are much too weak to stand up to evil. Puck can't do anything useful when Vargas is about to be executed, and when he sees that his efforts to convince Guts to do something are in vain, he simply charges into action without thinking and is caught almost immediately. And when he confronts the Count, Puck makes an incredibly poignant speech about humanity and how the Count has effectively run away from his past weakness and fragility. but his speech doesn't really seem to faze the Count at all. Hey man, if this was Naruto, the Count would have instantly become a good person and healed everybody who he killed previously. So while Puck's thoughts regarding humanity as well as his clear moral compass are central to the story and show us that there is light in this world of darkness, we are constantly aware of the fact that good does not always triumph. In this way, Puck's presence can help us understand Guts' state of mind even further, as if he was as altruistic as Puck is, then he most definitely would have died before the story even started. In some ways, Guts and Puck are two sides of the same coin, and they demonstrate two incredibly different outlooks on the world. And while Guts never becomes as pure as Puck is, not that he ever should, Puck shows us a way of caring for others that Guts will eventually learn to do once again. So while Puck is often just there for comedic relief in later arcs, and that's sometimes the reason that he exists within this arc, he's an incredibly important protagonist who completely contradicts Guts, yet he's still able to support him in spite of this. Puck is a major part of Berserk, and he's sometimes the heart of the series in a few ways, and without the Black Swordsman arc, his character would be much less significant in the overall narrative. Well, I could probably sit here all day just discussing the protagonists of Berserk. I would really be remiss to not pay just as much attention to the equally impressive antagonists. If the story just started at the beginning of the Golden Age, then something we would miss would be this incredibly early introduction to the apostles that we get during the Black Swordsman arc. I think these guys really set the tone for what's to come, and right from the first chapter, we immediately have to confront the fact that this world Guts is living in is truly hellish. The Snake Baron, Snake Lord, whatever you want to call him, he isn't necessarily the most compelling antagonist, but I think his character does do a good job of setting the tone for the series, like I said earlier, and he also gives us a fantastic fight scene with Guts right out of the gate. And while it's relatively simple compared to other apostles, I do actually really like his design. Of course, Berserk's artwork was not as fully developed back then when it first started, but the design of the apostles was still frightening enough to show us just how much Guts was risking every time he went into battle against one of them. But the apostle who really stands out during this arc has to be the Count. Not only does he have a straight up disturbing design and presence throughout the arc, but this character is also the catalyst for many important events and discoveries we make about the Berserk universe. Everything about the way that Miura sets up the Count as a character is done perfectly. At first, we believe that he's just another opponent that Guts needs to defeat, but as we learn more about this character, his significance to the story just seems to steadily grow. First, we learn about the Behelit and are introduced to the idea of the God Hand, and then we see him create a pseudo-apostle by lending some of his power to Zondark. These are concepts that never really go away, and when we encounter them later on in the story, for example, when the Egg of the Perfect World creates pseudo-apostles, we can't really help but be reminded of the Count to some degree. And of course, through the Count, we eventually see the God Hand for the very first time and learn exactly who Guts has been directing all of his hatred towards. Without the introduction of the Count and his Behelit, the sudden flashback to the Golden Age would not have worked nearly as well as it does, as we would have never seen Guts in the emotional state he was in after encountering Griffith again. In many ways, the Count is actually one of the most thematically important villains in Berserk. Okay, maybe that sounds like a bit too much to some people, but let me explain. Through his presence, we're able to naturally learn so much fundamentally important information about apostles and sacrifices. When he's able to summon the God Hand, we learn that apostles are able to sacrifice more than once, and when he tries to sacrifice Guts, we learn that you must sacrifice someone that you truly care about, meaning that Griffith must have truly cared for Guts in the past. And what's crazy is that Miura is able to humanize such a despicable apostle through just one event. This apostle that probably none of us could truly think of as human, just remember the fact that Vargas's family was eaten right in front of him, is shown to have been driven to the absolute depths of despair right before he became an apostle, and is also shown to have retained enough of his humanity to not sacrifice the one person who still truly mattered to him. I honestly think the Count is a really underrated antagonist, and together with characters like Rosine and Ganishka, he shows that even apostles still have some sort of humanity inside of them. The last set of characters I want to talk about are the God Hand. I mostly want to focus on Femto/Griffith, but I'd also like to say that the other members of the God Hand left an immediate lasting impression on me. Void has a really captivating visual design, and the fact that he's always the one who delivers the brand of sacrifice is still really intriguing to me. Even in the most recent chapters, we're still learning more stuff about him. Of course, Slan left an impression for other reasons. I will say that I didn't care too much about Ubik and Conrad. To be honest, I can't even tell the difference between them half the time. I mean, I know which one is which, but like, come on. The introduction of Griffith at this point in the story may be a bit confusing, but honestly, I think this order of events is absolutely perfect. In fiction, it's really not that common that you can see exactly how things end up, and based on the fact that we see a flashback of a sacrifice, you can infer just how things turned out this way to a degree, and yet you still have no idea what the fuck happened. Just like Guts' character, I think the way Griffith is introduced here sets him up perfectly to become one of the great antagonists in manga and anime. He parallels Guts almost perfectly in a way. They're both practically unrecognizable in the states that they're currently in, and based on Guts' reaction to seeing Griffith, it's very obvious that the history between these two is what led them both to become who they are in the present. Miura sets up this foundation for this history so incredibly early into the story, and then leaves readers in suspense for almost 100 chapters as he slowly builds up to the unavoidable eclipse. If the Black Swordsman arc hadn't happened, then this added layer of depth that we experienced during the Golden Age arc would never have existed. I would also say that this speaks volumes about how amazing the Golden Age arc is. We know that all of this terrible stuff is going to happen to our protagonist, and we know that Griffith is going to betray everyone else, and yet we can't help but become attached to the characters we meet during that arc. Again, without the Black Swordsman arc, I think the story would just lose an extra layer of depth and complexity. What also sets up Griffith as an amazing antagonist is the amount of contempt that readers can gain for him during these first few chapters. Now, Guts, as I've said already, isn't necessarily the most likable character at first, but I feel like Griffith is much more detestable here. He acts like Guts doesn't even exist and even mocks him for continuing to struggle against the God Hand and Apostles in general. The God Hands say that they don't even view Guts as a threat or enemy, as the apostles he's killed are just a few servants in their eyes. While I said before that there are some parallels between Guts and Griffith here, the way that Griffith acts makes the differences between them very clear. Guts is a struggler, and Griffith, at least in his state as Femto, is not. I think this confrontation simply sets up both of their characters incredibly well, and while Griffith gets much less screen time than Guts during this arc, the impact he makes during his relatively short appearance causes his presence to constantly linger in the reader's mind. Just like the apostles from this arc, Griffith and the God Hand set the tone for the rest of the series, and they build a huge amount of anticipation in the minds of readers as we begin slowly heading towards the climax of the Golden Age. I've already touched on these topics, so I won't linger for too long, but part of what makes this a great introductory arc is the amount of foreshadowing done here, as well as the way that this arc sets the tone for the rest of the manga. There are a million things that are foreshadowed here, so let me just name a few that I noticed while reading. The demon child being Guts' kid and following him around. The heretics from the Conviction arc seem to be the same type of heretics that were banging the Count's wife. Guts never lets people touch him because of the incident with Donovan. The Count tries to kill himself before turning into an apostle the same way that Griffith does before the eclipse. And pretty much everything about the eclipse and the way that sacrifices work is foreshadowed at some point during this arc. Now, I don't know if all of that was planned before the Black Swordsman arc was written, but the story just flows amazingly well because of all of this foreshadowing and setup. Once again, foreshadowing all of the different rules and limitations of sacrifices and how the Behelit and causality work just adds even more anticipation as you read through the Golden Age. Even if this heavy foreshadowing wasn't in this part of the story, I still think this arc is necessary to set the tone for the rest of the manga. While there are definitely a bunch of really dark and disturbing things that happen before the eclipse within the Golden Age arc, I think having the eclipse happen without this arc having set the tone beforehand would just be way too much for most readers. I love a good twist, and I think the eclipse definitely still manages to deliver that despite us generally knowing what its outcome is going to be, but I just personally think it would be way too much. During my first read-through of Berserk, I had to stop reading for a whole day or two during the eclipse because it just upset and disturbed me so much, especially all the stuff relating to Casca. And I don't get disturbed very easily, so I can't imagine how some other people might have reacted to it. And I think the Black Swordsman arc kind of serves as a warning. Like, if you can't stomach it, then you really shouldn't be reading any further. That actually saved me personally. The first time I tried reading Berserk, I was like 15, and I thought it was weird as fuck because the only thing I'd read before it was Naruto. True story, by the way. I quickly realized I just could not read this manga yet. There were fucking naked elves and the main character was getting whipped like halfway into the first chapter. I think I got to the part where the Count throws up his little mini-me and I just fucking gave up immediately. Personally, I think having this kind of warning section is a really good idea, even if to some people that concept might come off as a little edgy. If the Black Swordsman arc didn't exist, bro, I would have been scarred for life if I saw that horse scene, that's all I'm gonna say. And the last thing I want to talk about is the artwork during this arc. I think this is one of the most contentious aspects of this part of the story, as people always go into Berserk expecting the art to be absolutely god tier from the very start, and might be a bit disappointed at its quality at first. The thing about a long-running manga is that the art style constantly evolves, and ideally the story and characters should evolve along with it. So yeah, the art style is not as polished as that of later arcs, but I honestly think that's completely fine and understandable. If anything, I appreciate the fact that I'm able to read through Berserk and clearly observe how Miura's art evolved over time. That being said, I do think the early art in Berserk is fairly underrated. Miura was always able to capture the tone of Berserk within his artwork, and I think the Black Swordsman arc is a perfect example of that. What stands out to me in particular is the care he put into the apostles here. Every scene they appear in is honestly terrifying, and I think the more simplistic nature of their designs actually help to portray this feeling. These apostles don't have hauntingly beautiful or majestic designs like later characters such as Grunbeld do. The Count in particular is just straight up disgusting. I just love how fearful these apostles can make the audience feel, because at the end of the day, that's their main purpose at this point in the story. I'm not an artist or anything, but that scene where the Count is eating Vargas's family, just something about like the shading, the way that everything looks so dark and like almost dull in a way, even the kind of simplistic design of that scene helps to make it even more creepy. And even though the character designs were less complex at this point, and Miura hadn't really figured out human anatomy to the degree that he later would, what was always present in his panels were stellar action scenes. I particularly noticed how well the fight between Guts and the pseudo-apostle Zondark was drawn. It feels just like later Berserk in the sense that I honestly don't need an anime adaptation to understand everything that's going on in the fight. Action and fight scenes have always been a strong suit for Berserk, and it's important to realize that that's been true ever since it first began. Alright, thank you for watching this very long video. If you were on the fence about the Black Swordsman arc, or maybe you just kind of forgot about it and haven't read through it in a while, then I hope this video convinced you just how important and really underrated this arc is within the story of Berserk. Leave a comment letting me know your thoughts on this, and I'll see you next week with a new video. See ya.